The ownership of the building, the restaurant, and a $100,000 life insurance policy will be divided between her two children, the lawyer continued. My husband leaned back, smirking slightly. Finally, something worth our time, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for his sister to hear. She nodded, smiling, clearly pleased. They both looked at each other, visions of money flashing in their eyes, certain this was the payout they deserved. But neither of them could have predicted the shock that was about to unfold. My name is Brielle. My parents divorced when I started college. By the time I was old enough to understand, their relationship had already cooled down, and I spent my childhood pretending to be part of a perfect family. My father, who was popular with women, only married my mother because of my birth. He often said, if you hadn't been born, I wouldn't have married her, and he didn't even try to hide his infidelity. On the other hand, my mother, who was pregnant with me, was forced to drop out of college by her grandparents and become a housewife. She was deeply hurt, often crying whenever my father cheated on her, yet she kept me at a distance. This made me grow up feeling emotionally detached, so when they finally divorced, I thought it was for the best. I thought that if I could get the tuition and half of the living expenses for my 4 years of college at once, I would be independent from then on. My father went to his new wife and children. My mother went abroad. Now I live with my husband, who is 4 years older than me, and my 3-year-old daughter. My husband was originally my senior at the same company. For me, with a bad past, I expected that my relationship with him would not last long. However, he treated me as an equal, and for the first time, I felt like I understood what it meant to genuinely like someone. When he proposed, I was happy, but I was more scared. However, my in-laws quickly dispelled my worries. My in-laws are my parents-in-law and my sister-in-law, who is the same age as me. My father-in-law is a stepfather to my husband. When I told them there was a low possibility that both of my parents would attend the wedding, and that I was estranged from both sides of my relatives, my father-in-law said, well, then I can walk down the aisle with you, and he laughed. My mother-in-law also said, I don't care about the form. What's important to me is whether my son will be happy or not. So he and I got married. Our daughter was born in the 3rd year of our marriage. During that time, my husband changed jobs once and started a business with a friend of my sister-in-law's. Now he is busy every day as a co-representative of a travel company. At the recommendation of my parents-in-law, I help with the accounting of the company run by my father-in-law. It is a company that my father-in-law and his ex-wife started, but she passed away due to illness. My childless father-in-law devoted himself to running the company as a tribute to his wife. Now, it has grown to the point where it has its own building in New York. As a relative of the president, I work hard without relying on him. My father-in-law advised me, it was tough getting the company from startup to success. You have to be strong. So I manage everything at home and say to my husband, we're doing fine, so please take care of yourself. To which he responds, I will, thank you for understanding. But as the company continued to grow, his time at home only became more limited. Until then, we used to go to my parents-in-law's house together once a month, but we hardly go there anymore. I think we should go even a little, especially because we found out that my mother-in-law is seriously ill. After her first husband, my sister-in-law's father, died in an accident, my mother-in-law raised her children alone and ran a restaurant. She later remarried my father-in-law. My mother-in-law chose palliative care immediately after learning her diagnosis. My father-in-law tried to persuade her, please don't give up on surgery, but she ultimately said, please let me decide how to use my remaining time. I informed my husband, but he just said, if mom decided, neither my sister nor I have the right to interfere. I thought he was respecting her wishes, but my husband began to be reluctant to visit my mother-in-law, who was receiving home care. He was also easily swayed by my sister-in-law. Every time I visit my parents-in-law with my daughter, my mother-in-law glances behind us to see if my husband is coming. It hurts me. My father-in-law also looks pained, and when my daughter innocently says, Daddy hasn't played with me lately, my mother-in-law says sadly, yes, he's a bad dad. I'll have to scold him when I see him next. I also feel sad. One late night, my father-in-law contacted me to say that my mother-in-law's condition had suddenly worsened. and she had been taken to the hospital by ambulance. I quickly woke up my daughter and emailed my husband, but he didn't reply. When I rushed to the hospital by taxi, only my father-in-law was there. I wondered why this was happening at such a critical time, but even when I called the company, I only reached the answering machine, and my anxiety grew. Soon after, the doctor informed us that my mother-in-law had passed away. I returned to my parents-in-law's house with her body. About 2 hours later, my husband and sister-in-law arrived. By then, many employees from my father-in-law's company had come to help and offer condolences, and they all looked coldly at my husband, who had messy hair and was clearly hungover, and my sister-in-law, who wore a flashy dress. I didn't even feel like speaking to them. They both tried to make excuses, but my angry father-in-law said, "That's enough. I don't want to shout in front of my wife. Shut up." Scared by his cold words and the looks of those around them, they huddled in the corner of the room. My mother-in-law had been discussing her funeral plans with a friendly funeral home for some time, and news of her death had reached many who mourned her. The funeral was well attended, yet throughout it all, my husband and sister-in-law just sat there, oblivious to the looks from those around them. 10 days after the funeral, we received a letter from the attorneys, inviting us to the reading of my mother-in-law's will. My husband, his sister, and I gathered in my father-in-law's living room, waiting as the lawyers presented the document. My husband and his sister exchanged hopeful glances, and my father-in-law sat with a solemn expression. The attorneys formally informed us that the will was legally binding and began to read its contents. According to the will, the lawyer began, the deceased has left her savings, totaling $200,000, to her husband. My husband's sister looked slightly surprised, but before she could say anything, the lawyer continued. The ownership of the building, the restaurant, and a $100,000 life insurance policy will be divided between her 2 children. My husband leaned back, smirking slightly. Finally, something worth our time, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for his sister to hear. She nodded, smiling, clearly pleased. The will also specified that I was to receive my mother-in-law's personal belongings. These personal effects are to be given to her daughter-in-law, the lawyer said, looking at me. She wished that they remain with her for safekeeping. Mother's things? My sister-in-law scoffed. I mean, it's mostly antiques, right? I don't need any of that. You can keep it if you want, she said, waving her hand dismissively. I nodded and replied softly, Thank you. I'd like to pass them down to my daughter as a memory of her grandmother. We signed the necessary documents, and with relieved expressions, my husband and his sister accepted their shares, without question. With the reading over, we all left. A few days later, I received an express delivery from the same law firm. Inside was a sealed letter from my mother-in-law, with her familiar handwriting on the envelope, along with a small key. The letter explained that she had arranged for it to be sent to me privately, and asked that I go to a specific address with the enclosed key. She made it clear that this was for me alone, and I was touched by her thoughtfulness. Later that day, I took my daughter with me, and we drove to the address she had given. It led us to a small storage facility. Using the key, I unlocked a small storage unit and found a suitcase and a worn notebook. Inside the suitcase, I was stunned to find documents that confirmed my husband's infidelity, along with financial records showing the poor state of his business. The notebook contained a heartfelt message from my mother-in-law. My dear, the note began, I have left this for you because I believe you are the only one who can make wise use of it. I intentionally mortgaged the building, knowing that my children might misuse the inheritance. I wanted to prevent them from taking advantage of what I worked so hard to build. I couldn't leave without ensuring that you and my granddaughter would be safe. Take these documents and protect your future. Tears filled my eyes as I read her words, feeling her care and support even now. She had sacrificed so much to give us a stable future, knowing that her children might squander what she left behind. Her love for her granddaughter and her wish to protect us meant everything. Returning home, I knew what I had to do. I arranged a meeting with my husband and presented the evidence I had found. I know about the affair, I said, looking him in the eye as he stared at me, taken aback. And I know about your business troubles. I'm filing for divorce. What are you talking about? He tried to deflect, but I held up the documents, the proof of everything. His face fell and he sneered, "If you knew, you didn't have to go to all this trouble. Fine, do what you want." Without hesitation, I handed him the divorce papers, insisting on full custody of our daughter. "I don't want anything from you," I said. "No property division, just support for our daughter, that's all." He tried to laugh it off. "You're not getting anything else from me, so don't even ask," he said. "I'm not asking," I replied, standing firm. We finalized the agreement with a lawyer present, securing child support and custody terms. My father-in-law, who had quietly supported me throughout, witnessed the paperwork. Before my ex-husband left, he threw one last dismissive look my way. "Take care of yourself," he muttered, and with that, he walked out. In the weeks that followed, my ex-husband and his sister tried to sell the building, only to discover the debt left by the mortgage. They quickly realized that the finance company holding the mortgage had strict terms, and they had no means to repay it. The property was foreclosed, and their plans to profit from the inheritance fell apart. Both ended up struggling with debts and financial ruin. One evening, my father-in-law, seeing our struggle, approached me. "I know you've been through a lot," he said kindly. "You and your daughter are welcome to stay here for as long as you need. It would be nice to have family around." "Thank you," I replied, touched by his generosity. "I'd be happy to help with the house in return. It would mean a lot to us." Living with him brought peace and stability, especially for my daughter, who adored her grandfather. Slowly we rebuilt our lives, finding happiness together, far from the chaos of the past. One evening, as I looked at a photo of my mother-in-law, I felt immense gratitude for everything she had done to protect us. Her wisdom and love had given us a chance to start anew. With a quiet smile, I said, "You were more than just a mother-in-law to me. You were family."